This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Spyros Makridakis. He's the Emeritus Professor of Decision Sciences at INSEAD. Spyros' calling is to poke holes in the notion that we can forecast all of this accuracy. And that dovetails also in with the idea that simple is better. His classic paper from 1979, which essentially showed that moving averages are a far better predictor of tomorrow than all of the most complex econometric models. Well, let's just say the academic community did not exactly like him when he first put that research out. His most recent book, Dance with Chance, highly recommended. Go take a look at it for sure. Also, as an extra in my write-up for Spyros' appearance on this podcast, he has sent me, most graciously, several white papers, several PDF white papers. Take a look at them. I'm forever grateful to have the brightest minds on our planet come on my podcast. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Spyros. I'm preparing to talk to you today, and I can't help but come across this fairly famous passage from the former defense secretary in America, Donald Rumsfeld. He gets the attribution often, but I think Nassim Taleb is also been stated to have said this. Can you talk some about the statement? I mean, we're talking about known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. Why don't you start from the top on your influence and where you see that originally coming from?
Well, I think he's right. There's also another part. There is also the unknown knowns, okay, which he hasn't mentioned, which is also very important. For instance, there are a lot of things that we know, but we don't want to believe, what we call the illusion of control, okay, which is also part of the whole idea that we cannot forecast well and that the uncertainty is tremendous, it's very, very high. And right now, as a matter of fact, I'm doing a paper which is about a survey of forecasting and uncertainty, which goes beyond the book. And what we can conclude is that what we can forecast is really very, very little, and we're not willing to accept the uncertainty. To give you an example which really hits a lot, if you take medicine, how well the doctors can predict what's going to happen to us. Okay, and the fact is they cannot predict at all. Okay, and we have the illusion that they can predict. For instance, they did a study. They took something like 160 cases of disease that they had the diagnosis, and they gave it to physicians. They asked them to make a diagnosis. In the difficult cases, only 7% of the diagnosis was correct, which is amazing.
It's much worse than flipping a coin, huh?
It's much, much worse than flipping a coin. Well, it's not two cases, right? It's more than two cases, because the diagnosis is not, you cannot say it's going to be yes or no, because there are many, many different possibilities. And the worst thing is that the doctors, when they ask them how certain you are about the diagnosis, only 7% said that, 7% said that they were not certain, that they knew, what was going to happen. Okay, so we have a lot of problems with forecasting and with realizing what is the uncertainty in our forecast. And the fact is we're not willing to accept it, and there are serious implications for that.
Why don't you give my audience, because I'm going to come back into some of the medical examples. There's some great medical examples in this particular work, Dance with Chance. But why don't you lead my audience through the two main types, and you've done this more for a general audience, but the two main types of uncertainty you see, I think it's very clever how you define them as subway and coconut.
Well, there are some uncertainties that we can quantify, and there are a lot of uncertainties that we cannot quantify. And that's what Taleb calls the black swans. There are things which, for instance, the tsunami that hit in 2004, I mean, it hasn't happened before, okay? The previous one was, several centuries before, and it was not as big. But this can also happen, right? So this is the uncertainty. The financial crisis, the 2008 financial crisis from the subprime was something that nobody could have predicted, but it happened, and it almost destroyed the world financial system. So these are uncertainties, and these are the unknown unknowns of Rumsfeld. The uncertainties that we don't know, we cannot predict, and they hit us. Now, the other uncertainty, for instance, how much electricity we're going to consume during the next day, I mean, this is something that we can predict pretty accurately, unless if there's a blackout, if something happens, which is also a possibility. But this type of uncertainty we can predict. There are many other types of uncertainties we cannot predict. Okay. I don't know what more I can say in this respect, but there are a lot of things that we cannot predict, and we're so afraid that we cannot predict, and we're not willing to put it into the picture.
As you say, we're so afraid that we won't be able to predict.
Yeah, we're afraid, and we just pretend that it doesn't exist.
There was a great example in your work, and I think you and your co-authors, by my reading of it, there was a little edge in your writing. But why don't you talk about the example of a very well-known author named Jim Collins and his work? I thought it was fascinating. There wasn't a lot of writing on it, but it was just fascinating where you really just in a very short few paragraphs pointed out that one of the best-selling business books of all time might not really have any use for us.
It's not only this, there are a lot of books like this. The other famous book was In Search of Excellence, okay? Which again, you see, what we did basically, we said, what are the most important aspects of our life? Okay, and we said it's the first thing people say it's health. The second say it's wealth. And the third, they say it's happiness. How well can we predict each one of these three? And the answer is 0. And I'm going to send you a part of a paper that I'm doing right now, which is about medicine. It's a very, very rough draft, but I'm going to send it to you. So I'll send it to you, and you will see. In medicine, for instance, which is probably the most critical factors, our ability to forecast, it is absolutely 0. And there are so many examples of what the doctor said today is the correct thing, and then a month later or a year later, it's new research shows that it's not correct, that it's wrong. And this is about medicine. This is about our lives, about our well-being. And there are a lot of studies that they show that the great majority of medical research is wrong. Okay. But this is the research that they base all of diagnoses that they do about us, and they recommend something to correct it. Okay, they recommend medicine, they recommend, procedures. And then later they found out that new research changes the old research. And there's a famous author that has done a lot of work on this, and basically proves that medical research, the great majority, is wrong.
Look at something like cholesterol-reducing drugs, for example. You bring this up.
Yes, and there is a lot of talk that the whole thing is a myth. Okay, there are a lot of people who talk about the cholesterol myth. There are a lot of doctors that they don't believe anymore in cholesterol. And there are a lot of doctors that they say that, as a matter of fact, there are a lot of negative side effects. One of them is, for instance, loss of memory, because our brain is full of cholesterol. So if you stop the cholesterol going to the brain, to our brain, there are a lot of negative side effects. And it's not only the cholesterol, there's so many things, Like, for instance, aspirins. For so long, they were saying take an aspirin a day. Now they found out that it creates blood things in the stomach. It creates, negative side effects because it bleeds, the stomach bleeds if you take one every day. So now they recommend not to take aspirins.
There's no free lunch. And I was thinking, I'm in my 40s, and when I was in my 30s, the doctor did a blood test and he said, okay, you got to start taking cholesterol reducing drugs. And I looked at him and I said, what? And he's like, well, yes. And I said, no, thank you. I'm not taking those. And I didn't. It's been 15 years. I said, I'm just not taking them. I just started exercising a little bit more, but it didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, but there are a lot of people, there are a lot of doctors that recommend cholesterol drugs, and there are a lot of negative side effects about cholesterol drugs. And it's not only this. Now the new thing is don't do any preventive test about, for instance, cancer for women, breast cancer for men, prostate cancer. The new evidence is don't do any. It's more the harm than it's the good.
One of the big picture things that I thought was really interesting, the lack of good forecasting models, the lack of forecasting models that work at all. And you point out, it's this, you and your co-authors point out, the simple statistics work best, the simple exponential smoothing versus the massive econometric models that people create decades of their lives. And the simple smoothing, a moving average is the better forecasting tool.
Exactly. And there was a lot of resistance when I first did this work back in the end of 70s. There was so much resistance to this research finding, and now it has been proven beyond the slightest doubt that that's the case. That sophisticated models don't work. This is less is more. The simpler the model, the better it is.
There's quite a few successful traders out there that trade quantitative methods, and they talk about the advanced understanding they have, physics, quantitative methods. But when you get behind the scenes, they're often using something like a simple moving average to trade.
For instance, consistency in all of these things is important. It's very important, consistency. And as long as you are consistent, that's probably the most important aspect of trading. And if you have a rule, a lot of people, they're not consistent with them. They get, good news is over discounted and bad news is really under discounted a lot. Okay. And that's what creates the problem. And this thing is something that has been proven. So consistency seems to be important. Simple decision rules seem to be very important. And it's every place.
Those simple decision rules also outweigh the expert judgment as well.
Exactly. And this thing has been proven continuously.
Now, there's got to be quite a bit of people in the business and academia community that don't like what you have to say, that you and your co-authors,
no.
Everyone can't like this, do they?
Of course they don't like it. And the worst bunch are the doctors. The doctors don't like all of this new evidence. Okay, they don't like it because, in the United States, for instance, they spend 17% of GNP on on medicine, That's a huge amount. And what's very important is that areas that they spend much more on medicine, they don't live longer than areas that they don't spend money on medicine. Okay, which is another, fact. And what the doctors call the wallet test. You go to a hospital, they see how much money you have, and then they decide what treatment to give you to maximize their revenues. It's
a great feeling, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a great deal. Another thing which is very clear is cesareans. The World Health Organization, they just published a study, and they said that cesareans should be between 10 and 15% of births. In some countries, it's more than 70%. Okay, and it's harmful for the mother, it's harmful for the child, and they still do them because it increases their revenues, and it's much more convenient. Instead of calling them at 3 o'clock in the morning, they program it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay, the days that they are available.
It's frightening. Yeah, let me jump back really quick to the Jim Collins example. And as you said, it's not just Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. But I was thinking to myself, and from your book, it talked about, whatever happened to the 11 companies identified by Collins as having made the leap from good to great. And it turns out none of them appeared in the Fortune top 10 of most admired companies since 2001. Now, what's really interesting, too, is when I fly around the world and I go into the airport bookstores, that book is everywhere. It's everywhere. And that's not a knock against Jim Collins or anything, but it's just, what do you think is driving us when other people can say, hey, this research is off, it's not valid today, but still we want to sell it and keep giving it to people? It's kind of sad.
Yeah, but we like hero stories, right? And Jim Collins is a hero, and we like to listen to things which we think they're going to help us. But as most hero stories are wrong, the same thing is true with a lot of books about management, that they're wrong, but still people like to read them. And sometimes it's a placebo effect, okay? It makes us feel better, and maybe, they'll apply some ideas, and maybe there will be some improvement, but this is not based on past research, right? It's based on a kind of a placebo effect. That's my view.
The placebo effect example that you had in your book with Dr. Beecher with morphine in World War II, that was really a fascinating example.
Yes.
Why don't you talk
a lot of things.
Talk that one through for the audience for a second that might not be aware of that placebo effect.
Well, what happens if you take drugs, active drugs, and as a matter of fact, that's how in medicine now they do the test. They give an active drug to half people, and then they give a placebo, a pill, a pasteurized water to another group. And as a matter of fact, they do it what they call blind test. They don't know which of the patients they take the placebo and which take the active drug. And then they compare the difference between the two. And very often they find very, very small differences or no difference at all. In other words, the placebo, the pasteurized water, works the same as well as the active drug because it's in our mind that the drug helps us prevent a disease or correct a disease or some problem that we have. So that's the idea of the placebo. And it's so correct that now all of the national agencies that they approve drugs, they oblige the companies to do this blind test of active drug and placebo.
I thought one of the big takeaways from your work, and of course we can only get into so much today, and a whole career we can only break down to 30, 40 minutes, not very well, but I think for the average person out there, some understanding, they're better off focusing all of that energy that they have planning for the range of possibilities that could happen versus so many people, and you mentioned the hero issue, so many people want that person to appear on TV or appear in front of them and say, I know what will happen tomorrow, but there's literally no evidence in the socioeconomics of our world that this predictive of anything tomorrow works, but everyone still clamors for it.
Yes, this is the illusion of control, okay? We want to think that we can control our future, okay? And time after time after time, they have proven that that's the case, and we prefer to have the illusion that we can control the future with the reality that actually we cannot control, and let's do something to be able to anticipate things that we cannot control. Okay? That's the reason we take fire insurance for our house, right? Because we accept we cannot predict when there will be a fire. So the idea then is, let's avoid this illusion of control. Let's try to understand that we cannot control our future. We cannot predict it. And let's try to do something to anticipate and do the equivalent of taking insurance policies.
You get into the idea of accepting that you're operating in an uncertain world. What is one of the, from your research, the evidence, what are some of the best ways to begin the acceptance? I'm in an uncertain world. What's the best ways to start that acceptance process?
The problem it's psychologically very difficult to accept the uncertainty. Okay, it's extremely, extremely difficult because psychologically we're not willing to live in a world that we cannot predict, that anything can happen, which is the reality. I mean, cancer can hit us at any place, at any time, right? Now, what can we do about this? The problem is nothing. But by going, for instance, to do a prostate cancer test, it doesn't help us. As a matter of fact, it makes things worse.
The evidence of the prostate tests on what it can do to healthy men is amazing. It's awful.
Yeah, it's amazing. When I go and give talks and I talk about these things, why for men should not take the prostate cancer test, or for women the mammographies, then I ask them, do you accept the evidence? And they say yes. And then I ask them, are you going to continue doing this test? And they say yes. Which is, it's schizophrenic, but that's what's happening. They feel that by doing the test, somehow they protect themselves, and that's exactly the illusion of control. And while it's exactly the opposite, when you take the test, you increase your chances of dying earlier. Okay, but that's people. That's the way we think. How you're going to change it? You need a massive, educational campaign that nobody's willing to do.
Okay, it's good that you bring that up. Here I am. I have all these interesting guests like yourself on my show. I've talked to Daniel Kahneman, Gerd Gegenrenzer. I'm sure men that you respect. And so you add guys in like Nassim Taleb. You start to look. So there's this small army of people like yourself, like your co-authors, where you're all kind of working to to open the curtain, so to speak, to show people how things really work. How much of a dent, though? Because I wonder how much I'm kind of inside the illusion myself of like I'm looking at all these interesting authors like yourself, and I'm learning and I'm seeing how things really work. But I wonder how much of a dent you think you and your peers are making in getting something like the illusion of control better understood.
Well, I think very little. We have to be honest. Because the illusion of control is something which is really deep inside us, and it forces us to go into a certain direction. So somebody comes and says, look, I have 5 easy steps to tell you, how to become a millionaire or how to live longer. And then I come or some other comes and say, look, all of these are nonsense. And they don't want to believe that all of these things are nonsense, because deep down we feel that, it would be nice to have some certainty in our world, because our world is really, really uncertain. Okay? And this thing is the major problem with the whole thing. And unless if you have, and that's, what some author says, if you do a massive educational effort to try to get people to understand, for instance, this thing with prostate cancer and breast cancer. I mean, there are so many people who suffer tremendously because of the test, and these people are not willing to accept it. They say no. It's better to believe in the illusion of control rather than the reality of what is happening. In the example of the doctors, there is a group of doctors now that they believe that things have to change. But, nothing happens. And, in our book, we have a quote from Bertrand Russell, who says that to teach how to live with uncertainty, yet without being paralyzed by hesitation, is perhaps the chief thing that philosophy can do. Okay? I believe that's in the center of what is happening. Okay?
What drove you into this passion? Who was your mentors, your influence? When did you have that? When did you have that light bulb moment that said, "I want to go this way"?
Remember, I did the first study that proved that sophisticated models were less accurate than simple models. Okay, that was the first study that I did, and it was published back in '79. Okay, and what surprised me was the reaction of statisticians. Okay. And if you want, I can send you the paper.
Sure,
okay?
sure.
I'll send you 3 papers, okay? I'll send you 3 papers. I will send you a paper that I have done recently about the illusion of control. Okay. I will send you a paper about medicine and how well you can forecast, how well medicine can forecast. Okay. And I'll send you this paper, which was the first paper that was published a long time ago in the Journal of Royal Statistical Society. And you will see there, because when I present the paper, there were also comments. There were also comments from statisticians and how they attack me. Okay. And this is what got me to do another study where instead of me, they were saying basically the reason you found this result was because you don't know how to apply these methods, the sophisticated methods. So I organized another competition where now the forecast was done by experts, and we found exactly the same results, okay, where it meant that very simple models were much more accurate than sophisticated ones. Okay? And that's what drove me into this. It made me realize that, actually what the majority of experts believe, it's not necessarily true. Okay. And it got me more and more and more to understand that forecasting, as a matter of fact, provides us very little value, and usually for the short term. It's like weather forecasting. Weather forecasting, it's accurate for the next 3 days, but after that you cannot do anything. It becomes chaos theory.
As a young guy, though, when you were a young man, did you obviously weren't trusting the system, even before you got to the research and you could prove things. Were you trusting the system? You don't seem like that type of person.
Of course, because when you go to school, when you get a PhD, they teach you to trust the system. They teach you to trust research. Okay, but they don't tell you that the research is done because of many, many reasons, and people publish and because they want some benefits. They don't tell you these things, and somehow you believe that the conventional wisdom is correct. But then, from my example, I realized that the conventional wisdom was not correct. And I mean, my field was forecasting, so my interest was to prove that sophisticated models were better. As a matter of fact, I was teaching these sophisticated models, and I was doing consulting, and I was making money out of this. And then suddenly I realized it's not worth doing it, so can I continue fooling people, or I have to come and say that's the truth?
That's a pretty big career change, though. That's quite a shift, right?
Yes, it is. But, I mean, I believe that the truth is the driving force of everything, right? In my conscience was that I had to come out and say these things, and the fact that I would lose some consulting jobs, it didn't matter.
But was there? Here you are with a PhD. You're going down the direction of forecasting and trying to show these very complicated predictive models work. But was there a trigger moment where you, one day or a week or a month, where you just kind of talk about the feeling of when you decided, I can't do this anymore. I need to go. The simple method's the way to go.
Yeah, but you see, I didn't realize the reaction. I thought that once you prove something scientifically, the others will come and say, oh, you're right. Let's change our attitude. Let's change the way we think. And let's try to find ways to deal with the problem. I mean, that's what I thought would have happened. But it didn't happen like this. The reaction was absolutely devastating. For me, at that time, I was a young professor and a young researcher, basically saying, look, you don't know what you're doing. Okay. Because you're in a business school, you don't know statistics, you don't know how to apply correctly these models. And this thing is written in Dance with Chance. I mean, some place, I don't know where, but this story of how it started, it's there. Okay, I can send you another paper, at least you can find it. You don't mind if I send you a few papers?
No, go. Can I post these all for my audience too?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Sure, you can do it.
Okay.
It was published in the Slow Management Review, and basically says why we cannot forecast and what we can do instead. But what we can do instead, it's really against our psychological well-being, because, for instance, in a country like this, like Greece, it can be an earthquake, a devastating earthquake, can be a tsunami. The question is, what do you do with all of these things? Mm-hmm. Are you willing to accept it? Are you willing to accept that the uncertainty is huge, is tremendous?
As you and your co-authors say, the future is never exactly like the past. And we want to imagine that past is going to show us the way in the future, and it doesn't work like that.
Yes, exactly.
But it's exciting. Once you kind of have that deep in your bones, and clearly you've had it for a lot longer than I have, but once you have that in your bones, even if people are shooting bullets at you and throwing slings at you, it's still exciting to know. Once you kind of know how it works, it's more exciting. Even if we can't get everybody else to get on the same team, it's exciting, isn't it?
It is exciting, and we must educated the world, or at least as good part of the world as possible. For instance, for men, you'd say, don't do prostate cancer test. Okay, don't. This test, as the author says, the guy who discovered the prostate test, says that if you do it, it's like flipping a coin. The same predictive accuracy it has. Still, there are millions of people that do prostate cancer tests every year at a tremendous cost.
I thought also the one that you did, the amniocentesis test for Down syndrome.
Yes. Let me find this book by Alvin. Maybe you would like to see it. The name of the guy is Richard Albin, and he's the guy who discovered the prostate cancer test. And says the title of the book is The Great Prostate Hoax. And basically, it's worth getting this book if you're interested in this area. Because, this is the guy who discovered the prostate cancer test. And basically says, don't do it. It's devastating.
I thought was also interesting. You and your co-authors give some great points when you're dealing with a physician. Just simple questions, like, what if I do nothing?
Yes, the thing with chemotherapy. Okay, that's another amazing thing. The chance of surviving 5 years after you have chemotherapy from breast cancer, it's I think 1.5%. Yet they don't say what will happen. The studies, if you don't do chemotherapy, how long you're going to survive. Okay, which is precisely what you say. But 1.5, me as a statistician, it's not worth doing chemotherapy where it destroys everything on you. Yet they do it all the time. Doctors recommend because it brings in tremendous revenues. Okay.
You know what it also plays into too? It plays into the fantasy that we're all going to live forever.
Well, that's another thing. Or the other fallacy is it can happen to others, but not to us, right? Again, that's the illusion of control.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point about the chemo, though, that to say, okay, how much longer will I live with it and how much longer will I live without it? And put the doctor on the spot and say, please, doctor, tell me the answer.
Yeah, but they don't know, and they don't want to tell you. Then they start saying, oh, there is the hope, and there is this, and there is that. Okay.
Hey, well, listen, Professor, I appreciate you taking some time today. Where's the best? You're going to send me all these papers. I'm going to post them for my audience. A lot of people will check them out for sure. Where's the best? Is there a particular? Look, the book is Dance with Chance. It's on Amazon. I've already recommended it to people. They can find your academic website at the university really easy? Is there another particular website that you want to point them to?
There are a lot of websites for each of the areas, and in the papers that I will send you, I don't remember them right now. For instance, there are a lot of websites for diagnosis if you have a problem, or for recommended, ways to improve the problem. And what this site says is that if you go through them before you go to the doctor, for instance, it's going to be very helpful.
We've talked mostly the medical side of the book today. There's other angles in the book. For example, long-term capital management, which is one of the biggest boondoggles ever in 1998. We're probably still paying for that bailout today. There's a lot of different areas that you guys go in your book, but I think it's really interesting to talk about the medical ones because frankly, there's some simple heuristics and ways to think in your book that if you operate under, you're much better off than just trusting the system.
Yes, because the system has benefits, and the doctors have a lot of benefits, and the pharmaceutical companies have even bigger benefits. So they try to push you into directions that's going to maximize their revenues. Unfortunately, that's the case. Yeah. Unfortunately.
Professor, I appreciate you taking the time today. Once again, for everyone out there, Dance with Chance, take a good read. It's a smart piece of writing. I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.